Good morning for people in the US, and good evening for people in India. And welcome, everybody. The relationship between India and US will be a significant economic driver in the next century. Today, we are gathered to begin to identify some of the challenges and opportunities our two countries will face together in the years ahead and in the decades ahead. And we are so very fortunate to have Ambassador Taranjit Singh Sandhu, along with former ambassadors Nirupama Rao, Tim Roemer, and Richard Verma join us today. UC San Diego is hosting this event as part of our ongoing development of a new center for U.S. India relations at our School of Global Policy and Strategy. The new center will serve as a hub for the study of modern India and the study of U.S. India relations. It will become a home to collaborative research aimed at facilitating dialogue and informing policymakers of both of our great democracies. And it makes sense for this center to be located at UC San Diego, where we are able to leverage our existing strengths and connections to researchers in India. Last year, we at UC San Diego welcomed about 7,800 international students and scholars from 104 different countries in the world. About 2,600 were graduate students and postdoctoral workers, and about 420 of them were from India, the second highest number of graduate and postdoctoral scholars from any single country. And the majority of those were postdoctoral and visiting scholar appointments. And they were spread all over UC San Diego. UC San Diego benefits tremendously from the developing expertise in all of these areas of interest that is brought here by our visiting scholars. And so will the new center. The new center will have outstanding faculty affiliations, and you will learn more about these in a minute. The new center will also leverage our existing partnerships. For example, the Tata Institute for Genetics and Society, which has been housed at UC San Diego since 2017, will be leveraged. TIGS, or TIGS as we call it, brings together expertise in health, ethics, policy, and economics to connect researchers and experts in India with larger UC San Diego research and education initiatives. It provides ethical guidance for research activities in bioscience and the application of new technologies. And all of these assets and partnerships set the stage for the development of big ideas that lead to big innovations. As the world's two largest democracies, we can and we should work together to drive prosperity, improve health, and increase peace and security, and end environmental degradation. And we can do this not just for our two great countries and nearly 1/4 of Earth's population, but also for the well-being of the entire planet. And as you can see, we have a lot to gain and really a lot to gain by working together. And so before we get started with today's discussion, let me introduce our next speaker, our Executive Vice Chancellor, Dr. Elizabeth Simmons. Dr. Simmons.
Thank you, Chancellor Kosa, for the introduction. It's a great pleasure to join you and our esteemed colleagues today as we continue conversations about how we may facilitate collaborative research and educational efforts to tackle some of the biggest challenges facing the world today. UC San Diego is home to outstanding social scientists, data scientists, STEM researchers, and policy analysts who are working on some of the most pressing issues that have particular impact on India and the United States. And the 21st Century India Center will mobilize all of UC San Diego's broad social science and STEM expertise to drive thought leadership, education, and public engagement in areas involving India and the US, such as security, migration, and geoeconomics, human capital development, and the intersections of healthcare, technology, climate, and policy. Some of our outstanding UC San Diego faculty who will be affiliated with the center include Professors Prashant Bharadwaj, Craig McIntosh, Kartik Muralidharan, and Anita Raj, and also Professors Tivrat Garg, Gaurav Khanna, Garth Nellis, and Paul Niehaus, and many others as well. The center will enhance UC San Diego's educational offerings at all levels, from the undergraduate to the postdoctoral, and will foster policy dialogues that could lead to innovations benefiting India while also enhancing the relationship between India and the United States. And I'm particularly, as Chief Academic Officer, I'm particularly excited about opportunities for our students to deepen their education by taking focused courses related to the challenges India and the US are tackling together, offered by faculty and scholars affiliated with the center, and then taking that education outside the classroom by participating in the conferences, industry roundtables, public lectures, and other opportunities that the center will generate over time. UC San Diego aspires to be as proudly innovative in education as in scholarship, and the 21st Century India Center will exemplify this innovation as it helps us prepare the next generation of leaders together. And now it's a pleasure to introduce the Dean of UC San Diego's School of Global Policy and Strategy, Dr. Caroline Freune, to say a few words about the center and opportunities for further collaboration. Caroline?
Thank you, Chancellor Khosla and Vice Chancellor Simmons, and thank you to our distinguished panelists for joining us today. Since its inception, the School of Global Policy and Strategy has had an Asia focus, putting us really at the forefront of research and policy discussions on the region. India is a large, fast-growing economy and a critical ally in the region, a country and a relationship of tremendous opportunity. GPS is focused on creating a world-class India Center that will be a hub for the study of modern India and U.S. India relations, sparking important research and policy conversations. Today's event is a soft launch of this center as we move forward with plans for a more formal launch sometime next year. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, Ambassador Sandhu, let me first say a few words about Kartik Muralidharan, who will moderate the discussion in today's event. You have their bios, but because our time is short, my introductions will be brief. Kartik is the Tata Chancellor's Professor of Economics at UC San Diego's Department of Economics. He's a world-renowned economist who focuses on development, public and labor economics. He has also provided policy advice in India at both the central and state government levels. So he's a perfect moderator for our event today. Ambassador Taranjit Singh Sandhu is one of the most experienced Indian diplomats on U.S. affairs, having served in the Indian mission in Washington, D.C. twice earlier. He was Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy of India in Washington, D.C. from 2013 to 2017. Earlier, he was First Secretary at the Embassy of India in Washington from 1997 to 2000. He's also been at the Permanent Mission of India to the United Nations in New York from 2005 to 2009. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Taranjit Singh Sandhu. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you. I'm delighted to participate in today's Ambassadorial Roundup on India-US relations. I appreciate the opportunity to share this platform with the most experienced policy leaders of India-US relations. It's even more special to share the space with my former boss, Ambassador Nirupama Rao. Also glad to see friends Ambassador Richard Verma and Ambassador Tim Roemer here. My compliments to the School of Global Policy and Strategy of the University of California, San Diego, Chancellor Pradeep Khosla, EVC Simmons, Dean Freune, Professor Kartik Muralidharan, and leadership and faculty of UCSD for putting this together. I had the pleasure of visiting San Diego this summer. Pradeep, I still cannot forget the evening spent at your residence, the incredible view overlooking the mountain and the ocean, and more importantly, the most interesting conversations we had with you and the faculty. I would like to commend the scholarship and the important work that the school is doing on issues of global interest and in advancing the discussion around India-US ties. It's not easy to speak before such a distinguished panel and audience. In fact, I thought about it and I was not sure as to what new dimensions I can bring before all of you. My attempt is to give you a perspective. So I will touch upon the 5 broad aspects of India-US partnership that makes it different or unique. The question I'm trying to answer here is, what makes India-US relations a partnership like no other? Of course, we are many diplomats here, so you may feel that this is what diplomats say about every relationship. Your doubt is reasonable, but after these 5 elements, you can decide for yourself whether these aspects are indeed unique. Friends, in September, Prime Minister Modi visited Washington, D.C. for the bilateral meeting with President Biden and the first in-person Quad Leaders Summit. The Prime Minister's visit to the US was a demonstration of the enduring strength of the partnership. It was a landmark visit. In the United States, relations with India have had bipartisan support, whether in the US Congress or at the White House. And likewise, in India, the partnership has enjoyed cross-party support. The last 2 decades have seen a qualitative transformation in the India-US relationship, which I'm sure all the ambassadors here will agree. I have been a witness to this transformation, having been associated with this relationship for nearly 25 years. From space to artificial intelligence and nanotechnology, from trade and commerce to startups and innovation, defense and security, health and education, there is no activity or human endeavor that our relationship today does not cover. That brings me to the first aspect of this relationship, which is the pace and the speed. It is like an action-packed thriller movie where by the time you realize what has happened, the story has already moved ahead to the next level. Just take the last 6 weeks after Prime Minister's visit, and you will understand what I'm talking about. We have had Chief of Defense Services visiting the US, followed by a visit of Defense Secretary and Secretary Defense Production. We had the health dialogue in Delhi, wherein an umbrella health MOU was signed. Then there was Industrial Security Agreement Summit to develop protocol for exchange of classified information between the defense industries in both countries. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman visited India. Deputy USTR and the Chief of Naval Operations of the United States visited India thereafter. Finance Minister of India had a substantive visit to the United States. Naval exercise Malabar Phase 2 happened off the coast of Bay of Bengal. Military exercise Yuddha Abhyas was held in Alaska. Commerce Minister met USTR on the sidelines of G20. EM met Secretary Blinken virtually along with the foreign ministers of Israel and UAE. On the industry side, US ISPF and US IBC had their annual meetings. We had bilateral counterterrorism dialogue in DC. EM met Secretary Blinken in Rome on the sidelines of G20. PM participated in G20 and COP Glasgow. He was part of the Global Supply Chain Summit hosted by President Biden on the sidelines of G20. Prime Minister also participated in Build Back Better World infrastructure event hosted by President Biden in Glasgow. And as we speak, Special Forces exercise Vajra Parehar and NSG exercise Tarkash are underway in Seattle. I have only listed out the main ones, and please remember all these happened in less than 6 weeks, covering various sectors from strategic to defense, to trade, to health, to climate mitigation. I'm not going to tell you about the events which are scheduled in the days ahead, as that would eat away half my speech. Friends, the speed, pace, momentum are very real. Equally true is the scale or depth of the partnership. And that brings me to the second aspect of this partnership. What drives this momentum? Where does the energy come from? It comes from the people on both sides. So here is a relationship which is people-driven and people-centric. People like you set the benchmark. Your aspirations guide us, and we need to live up to your expectations. Our real success is measured by how quickly and how effectively, as governments, we are able to match your expectations. And in this, industry, civil society, intelligentsia, strategic community, and universities like UCSD all have an important role to play. So this is a relationship where South Block or C Street or Pennsylvania Avenue tries to catch up with people's dreams and aspirations. The 4 million strong Indian American community in the United States has played an important role in bringing our countries closer together. The 200,000 Indian students in the US is another important bridge, and no one knows this better than universities like UCSD. India is a young and aspirational society, and we consider the United States an important partner in our development. As democracies, this is a very important aspect. So the movie is directed by the people on both sides. As Karthik is here today with us, I will take the liberty to use an economic jargon to explain my next point, the third one. So we have this relationship which is people-driven and which is moving ahead at a spectacular pace. So what does it entail? Is it just for the benefit of people in both our countries? The answer is no. India-US relationship creates huge positive externalities for the world. It is not just in the interest of India or US alone. A stronger India-US relationship is in the interest of the world. It brings with it global good. When we combine US technology and investment and India's manufacturing power, we make a huge difference to the world we live in. Today, under the Quad framework, our countries are collaborating on vaccine manufacture and delivery in the Indo-Pacific region. Today, under our science and technology partnership, nearly 7 COVID vaccines are under development. And this is also deep-rooted. Several years before, and all my co-panelists will remember this, under our vaccine action program, we developed Rotavac, a vaccine against rotavirus, which causes diarrhea amongst children, and we distributed it together in Africa. The cost of one vial of vaccine fell, thanks to our partnership, from $60 to $1. You can imagine the wonders this relationship can do to the people in Africa, Latin America, Indo-Pacific, and beyond. That brings me to my fourth point. Does all this mean that this relationship is free of challenges? And no one knows this better than the people here on the panel. I think my beard started graying early thanks to the years spent on the US account. The India-US partnership has come a long way from the time when our relations were colored by Cold War politics. We have tried to overcome the hesitations of history as Prime Minister Modi spoke in the US Congress in 2016. The increasing trust between our two countries is an important function in the equation. It is not that the relationship has not seen any challenges. Whether it is the sanctions imposed on India after our nuclear tests or the arrest of an Indian diplomat, we have seen difficult times. But every time there was a challenge, as democracies, we have been able to sit down and talk, and that has made all the difference. We have emerged from every crisis stronger and better. So these days, when people ask me, have you seen this or that? Aren't you worried? I tell them that my confidence and optimism stem from my foundational belief that as democracies, we will be able to surmount any difficulties that come our way. This brings me to my last point. Given the true potential in this relationship, I feel there's a lot that remains to be achieved. As I always say, what India and the United States can together achieve, is only constrained by the power of our collective imagination. And each one of us has a role to play in transforming that potential into reality. I will be remiss here if I did not mention the immense potential of our economic ties. With over $150 billion in trade, $67 billion in mutual investments, 200 Indian companies with a presence in the United States, and more than 2,000 US companies in India, the potential of economic partnership between our countries is an enormous one. In this regard, I also want to underline one or two important points. Friends, India-US relations stand on its own footing. As I have listed out, this relationship derives its energy from each other. It is not dependent on or influenced by any third country. Viewing this relationship through a third country lens would be incorrect and inappropriate. Also, given the broad canvas of our relationship, it is critical to see the big picture. While we all tend to look at the small piece, many a time we have to take a broad vision. All that we do should be building blocks of a large canvas. We cannot afford to work in silos or look at things piecemeal. I urge all of you to help in this process. And before I conclude, I would like to outline the priorities of India-US relationship in the days ahead, which I refer to as 5 baskets: healthcare and pharma cooperation, energy partnership, particularly renewable energy and climate change mitigation, the knowledge and education partnership, the tech and innovation partnership, and the defense and strategic partnership. Each of these fields represent not only areas of G2G cooperation, but also expanding economic opportunities. We can discuss some of these elements during our Q&A. I started with what makes India-US relationship a partnership like no other. I hope I have been able to convince you that it is not just a good diplomat talking, and the relationship is indeed unique. I also started with an action-packed thriller movie. Friends, believe me, the best is yet to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Sandhu, for those wonderful opening keynote remarks. It was a pleasure to meet you in person recently when you were visiting San Diego at the Chancellor's residence. So let me now just quickly lay out the rules of the game. We had 3 very, very distinguished panelists who are all former ambassadors. I'll briefly introduce them, ask them each one question, and partly to provide some additional texture and context to Ambassador Sandhu's comments, and then we will have an open discussion that I will moderate. We will be taking a few questions from the audience, so please feel free to type them in. I'm already seeing a couple of those questions, and we'll bring them in at the end. So let me, not read out the full biographies of our extremely distinguished panelists, but briefly introduce them in the order in which I will call upon them. So Ambassador Tim Roemer is a former 6th-term U.S. Congressman from Indiana, a commissioner in the 9/11 Inquiry Commission, and U.S. Ambassador to India appointed by President Obama. He served in the House Intelligence Committee, a member of the 9/11 Commission, and advocated for less bureaucratic and more dynamic government organizations and creation of a National Counterterrorism Center. At a personal level, I'm delighted that he's a graduate of UC San Diego, and we're especially happy to welcome him back home at this event at his alma mater. Ambassador Rao is one of India's most distinguished diplomats and has served as India's ambassador to Sri Lanka, to China, and the US, and retired as Foreign Secretary to the Government of India, which is the senior-most position in the Foreign Service. She has been a trailblazer throughout her career as being the first woman to ascend to many of these senior-most positions in the government. She has taught at Columbia, at Brown, and has recently completed a widely acclaimed book on the India-China relationship between 1949 and 1962. On a personal level, I first met met her in 1995. Speaking of India-US relations, that was my first year in the US as a freshman in college when Ambassador Rao was in the US Embassy in DC, and I'm delighted to welcome her to this event. And finally, we have Ambassador Richard Verma, who is a veteran of the United States Air Force and a recipient of a number of military awards and civilian decorations, including the Meritorious Service Medal and the State Department's Distinguished Service Award. He is a former Assistant Secretary of State and has also worked on Capitol Hill as a National Security Advisor to the Senate Majority Leader. I had the pleasure of meeting him a couple of years ago for the first time, and the most memorable thing he mentioned, which I remember because I haven't done this yet myself, is that at a personal level, he has visited every state in India during his time as ambassador, and we are delighted to have him here. So let me kick off the discussion by asking one question to each of our distinguished panelists, and let me start with Ambassador Roemer, given his background in strategic affairs in particular, to comment about the larger U.S. Policy outlook in Asia Pacific, and dealing both with some of the initiatives such as AUKUS and the Quad and Five Eyes, but also kind of remarking on the withdrawal from Afghanistan and what that's done in the region, and to help provide some texture to understand what these actions mean for U.S. engagement in the region.
Well, thank you for the question. And before I begin to address it, let me thank the Chancellor for the wonderful introduction. Let me salute and commend the Ambassador for his very comprehensive talk there and very adroit articulation of the relationship between the United States and India. And let me congratulate UCSD on not only having this forum today, but the start of the 21st Century U.S. India Center, which is going to bring, I hope, solutions and results and new ideas to this dynamic strategic relationship between the United States and India. Let me start, Kartik, by talking about the Quad. It helped shape the strategic environment, not just between the United States and India, but in the region. It is flexible and agile. That's one of its many, many strengths between Japan, the United States, and India. One of the things that I think is so important is that it addresses multiple issues. It is not constrained to one set of particular issues. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Theodore Roosevelt once said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." That's what the power of these maritime democracies cooperating and working together can do in this part of Asia and the balance of power in the world. It was started back by George W. Bush, a Republican president, to respond to the tsunami of 2004. And it was very agile in bringing the four countries together and addressing the problems, the delivery of aid, the medical issues. That, again, as I said before, underscores its strength. There is not a secretariat involved. There is not a treaty involved. There is no real formalized agreement. So that allows us in this Quad to move quickly and dynamically within our governments and between governments, which I know Ambassador Rao and Ambassador Verma will appreciate, because sometimes our government bureaucracies can move very slowly on things, and the Quad allows us to move a little bit quicker. The power of these maritime democracies are now moving into vaccines, as the ambassador mentioned. Over 1 billion vaccines have been promised to different countries in the world, especially some of the poorer countries in Southeast Asia. Supply chain resilience is another issue as we see ports clogged around the world, inflation starting to creep up, middle-class people paying more for what they're trying to buy. This is one of the most important issues that the countries could be involved in. And then for the future, Kartik, we could be working on such things as infrastructure to respond to China's One Belt, One Road, affordable dynamic infrastructure projects that don't get countries into debt traps, digital trade agreements, and we need to work on economic issues. That's the foundational piece right now that the four countries, but especially the US and India, need to work on and show results, which will certainly get other countries in the region's attention, especially China. I want to also mention the most recent agreement that is not particularly directly associated yet with India, but it's the AUKUS agreement. Australia, the United States, and the UK coming to an agreement not just on submarines, which has gotten a lot of attention, 8 new submarines that will be developed and deployed by Australia with many more capabilities than the diesel subs they were going to buy. This really is a game changer on the defense side and in the area. The nuclear subs will allow Australia to keep their subs underwater much longer and therefore not detectable. It also allows different kinds of strategic calculations by the other side, which will make it much more difficult to find these subs. And one of the beautiful things about this relationship is what has not gotten as much attention as the subs: the underwater cable agreements, the AI, the artificial intelligence agreements, the intel agreements, all the potential on quantum technologies. These are areas that define the future for so many of what the US and India and people outside this AUKUS agreement might be doing in the future. And finally, the Five Eyes Agreement, which was started in 1946. Again, it does not directly involve India, but it shows the future on geospatial communications, on intel sharing, on a host of things that as we started the Five Eyes, and it was primarily developed to focus on the Cold War and the Soviet Union, now it is starting to change and focus on new threats around the world, things that India is much more concerned about and focused on in their neck of the woods. And an area that, to your question, Kartik, on Afghanistan, the Five Eyes have focused more and more on how the different countries involved can share intelligence to improve results and outcome on defense and strategic issues, not just on Afghanistan, but on other threats, transnational threats, terrorism threats in the area. Again, this is an area that we might see expanded U.S.-India cooperation. In Afghanistan, as Ambassador Rao will remember, when she was Foreign Secretary, she and I had many meetings as President Obama sent me up to Afghanistan to get India more involved in a regional outcome there. And India, with its religious ties, ethnic ties, cultural ties, and under the leadership of Prime Minister Singh, decided to invest up to $2 billion in different economic programs, women empowerment programs, policing programs, peace programs. And the United States and the world were very grateful to India's investment in trying to provide a peaceful region and a successful outcome in that part of the world. There's much work to be done today there with the U.S. exit from Afghanistan. While the exit could have been smoother, I think it is the right move for the United States strategically so that it can invest more of its resources, personnel, and time on the U.S.-India relationship, on the region, and in countering China's aggressive stance toward our friends like India.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Roemer. Let me bring in Ambassador Rao now to expand and build up on exactly some of those strategic considerations, but with a focus perhaps on the Indo-Pacific and Afghanistan, and particularly from India's perspective, how the change in US actions in the region in the past 6 months, what the implications are for India, for the region, and for global peace and security.
Thank you, Kartik. First of all, let me thank Chancellor Khosla Vice Chancellor Simmons, Dean Freune. Of course, it's wonderful to see an old friend and esteemed colleague, Ambassador Taranjit Singh here today. And of course, also equally distinguished former colleagues, Ambassador Roemer and Ambassador Richard Verma. Karthik, it's wonderful to be interacting with you. Thank you. So to elaborate on India in the Indo-Pacific, if I may interpret your question in that fashion, I'll begin with the exit of America from Afghanistan. Initially, I think the shock and awe, literally, of that it came across as a spectacle of surrender. But I think with the prospect of living to fight another day, as I mentioned in something I wrote recently, how do countries like India, and particularly here we are situated in this vast subcontinent of South Asia, which essentially should be an integer, but it's not that way. We haven't developed regional cooperation and patterns of integration to the extent that we would like to. But we see ourselves as a region in churn, really, and our pathways to conflict and peace are in a way crisscrossed in a state of perpetual animation. Ambassador Sandhu referred to this movie, analogy. So it's something like that. You never know what the next week's episode is going to bring. But particularly for India, through our history, we've been a hub country. We've been porous, we've been permeable, we've weathered wave after wave of migration, even conquest, assimilation. So that's how we are. Now, what are the prospects of intensified U.S.-China rivalry post what has happened in Afghanistan, and also given the situation in the Indo-Pacific today? Now, as a South Asian country, I believe I would speak for many in India when I say this, the duality of U.S.-China competition or confrontation or conflict, whatever you name it, or its alternative, which is unbridled Chinese hegemony, it can't be the binary choice for us. We need more robust, healthy multipolarity, plurilateralism, multi-alignments, whatever you call them, and with roles for middle players as much as for great powers in the region. And that's the manner in which we see an ideal equilibrium in the region being established. So you see, because we are concerned that when two superpowers like the US and China seek to trample each other, the ground trembles, as we all know, if you know the stories from our mythology. Now, the Indian Ocean, looking at the atmosphere in the Indian Ocean, it's the busiest trade channel in the world today. And the security of this maritime domain is of crucial strategic importance to the world and to India. So even as the US gets tough on China, or China gets tough on the US, we must realize that the countries that inhabit this maritime space and continental Asia do not want to play the game of ideologies. We definitely do not want to do that. We have lives to improve, we have economies to grow, boundaries to safeguard against terrorism, health, and we have health concerns, we have physical infrastructure to improve, essentially dreams to chase and fulfill. So the waning of trust in American power and influence does trouble us. Even without an alliance relationship, the United States is viewed in India as a natural ally, as a very, very close partner. And we share much as far as strategic convergence is concerned when you look at the region. Of course, the Ambassador Sandhu referred to this, the appeal of the US as a democracy, as a champion of fundamental freedoms, plural societies, respect for diversity, which is so important in democracies such as ours, and its economic and military heft and global reach. That hasn't gone away, regardless of what has happened in Afghanistan or, how you may regard that. And another thing I believe that links India and the United States are the numerous blood relationships that link our two countries today with the 4 million strong Indian American diaspora in the United States, which has mainstreamed into the core of American life today. They are no longer on the margins. So when you think of the relationship between Delhi and Washington, between India and the United States, it's a valued relationship, and it's a comprehensive strategic partnership with a global reach. So when China and India fell out over the Galwan Valley incident last year in June 2020, You saw that New Delhi came much closer into groupings, coalitions, you may call them, like the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue and the naval exercises that we do, the intelligence sharing. There's been a lot of convergence and a lot of contact and communication and actual cooperation and collaboration between India and the United States as a result of that. And we've come to place a premium on groupings like the Quad. Ambassador Roemer just referred, to the architecture and the anatomy of the Quad. And it enables cooperation between like-minded democracies such as ours, Japan, Australia, the United States, and India. But the Quad has tended to focus a great deal on the maritime environment of the Indo-Pacific. We've talked of smooth connectivities, we've spoken of resilient supply chains, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, cooperation in technology, vaccine diplomacy, the negotiated settlement of disputes with respect for international law. I also believe that the Quad should not turn away, and this refers to what Ambassador Roemer also said, salvage to the maximum extent possible an inclusive development dividend for Afghanistan. That is very, very close to my heart personally, something that empowers women, that promotes minority rights. But you're looking at the scope and extent of alignments, present and future, plurilateral in many cases, trilateral, a cooperative grid of activities between countries that want peace, that do not want ideological divides in the region, that want cooperation where it can happen. Secretary Blinken referred to collaboration when it's needed, competition when it's inevitable, and adversarial, situations where you have to deal in a confrontational way with a country like China. So that is the way, the lay of the land, literally, and the sea today for all of us in this region. Now, does the U.S. lack a grand strategy for the region? That is a question that is often asked. And the adverse and the negative side to that is that it enables the Chinese to regard this period as one of great opportunity. And the situation, you've watched how China and Russia have built a very close partnership in a display of strategic and political alignment. They want to define a new normative landscape for the region. Now, India has traditionally had close ties with Russia, and that hasn't exactly, disappeared given the current situations and the new alignments. But the fact is that the China-Russia partnership today is a factor on the geopolitical scene, on the geopolitical map of the Indo-Pacific. America's competition with China must not chart the future of the region in a manner that causes irrevocable fault lines. That's how we see it. Shibboleths like my enemy's enemy is my friend, or picking winners or losers may not apply, especially in Southeast Asia. We constantly speak of the centrality of ASEAN, for instance. Now, you look at Southeast Asian countries, and many diplomats like Ambassador Bilahari Kausikan have referred to this, that, the nations of Southeast Asia practice what is sometimes called promiscuous diplomacy, and not monogamous diplomacy. And they believe in hedging, balancing, bandwagoning when it's necessary. It's all in the political DNA of the region. So that's where I think the US should count more on the situational awareness and the inbuilt compass of countries like Japan, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Singapore. These can be invaluable assets in navigating what would otherwise be a very perilous passage for the US through the Indo-Pacific. Now, Taiwan and the future of what happens in Taiwan, that is an example. But I think there is enormous scope for the US and its partners in the region to develop dialogues, even with China, when it comes to issues like climate change, for instance, when it comes to issues like health, pandemic control and elimination. That's another area where we can discuss and build cooperation across political and strategic divides. So you have to think of an architecture, a map, a series of grids for the region that enable cooperation in areas that help the populations in this vast expanse, which really houses a good proportion of the world's population today. So conflict awareness, conflict prevention, I think that should be uppermost in our minds. But at the same time, we must, we cannot afford to lower our guard, obviously, against blatant violations of international law and attempts to trigger conflict. That is something we have to be constantly aware of and alert to. But keep the region in mind, keep especially the countries of Southeast Asia in mind, keep countries on the continental landmass, also the landlocked countries. We've had a focus on the maritime environment of the Indo-Pacific, the US especially, but the US also has to look at Eurasia, look at the landmass, look at the way China is developing linkages across Central Asia into Europe. Look what has happened in Afghanistan. So we cannot afford to let that drop from the radar. So you need a vision for the Indo-Pacific that is as much land-based as it is sea-based. I'll stop here.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador Rao, for those wonderfully insightful comments. Let me turn to Ambassador Verma and, ask, kind of build up from some of those comments in terms of, India and the US are often talked about as natural allies. There's democracy, there's cultural connections, there's belief in a stable world order. But the flip side is the India-US relationship is often characterized as something with always more potential than what it's delivered, And so when you think about what it means to be a natural ally in the absence of a formal alliance, how do we make this very concrete, right? What are concrete areas of collaboration, including the economic sphere, that would cement this idea? I think Ambassador Sandhu started out in particular talking about some dramatic movements in the past 6 months. And so maybe my question itself is a little antiquated, that we've seen events in the past 18 months that have made things much more concrete from what used to be a more ambivalent Indian kind of position, but would love to get your thoughts in and bring you in on specific areas of collaboration and how you see this kind of idea of natural allies working out in practice.
Sure, thank you. And it's really a delight to be with all of you. Congratulations to UCSD for putting together such an incredible panel, but also this center focused on India. I'm really excited about it. Let me make 3 points. First, I would say, we're actually on a 20-year upward cycle on U.S.-India relations. There's just no question about it. From the year 2000, when President Clinton visited, to today, it's definitely been on an upward track. And so sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit. We really like to beat ourselves up that we haven't done enough, we haven't seen enough, where's the activity? But really, we've come together in solid ways for a lot of different reasons. We are, because of our people-to-people ties, because of our strong democratic connections. Obviously, the rise of China has frankly brought us closer together. And we look out at this India of 2030 that will almost lead the world in every category. Third largest economy, third largest military, most college graduates, most populous country, most cell phone users, most internet users. So, I think there's real excitement in the United States to want this to be our leading partner in Asia and one of our closest partners. So no question about it, a great upward trend. That's the first point. The second point I would make, however, is that the relationship does not organize itself and does not naturally go upward. And in fact, if we don't have champions on both sides in Delhi and Washington actually stewarding the relationship, pushing it forward, if it becomes very transactional, if we're just buying and selling things from each other, if we forget about the shared values that actually connect us, then we're going to revert back to some of those historical overhangs which held us back. Ambassador Sandhu was right to mention Prime Minister Modi's great quote before the Congress in 2016 about the hesitations of history. You know, unfortunately, some of those hesitations are still very much real. And there's a cautiousness in how we approach each other at times. There's a reluctance to go too far and too fast, which I understand, but we have to continue to nudge it forward. We're still missing some very significant elements of our cooperation. I think the economic connections have been particularly uneven. We don't have any framework for economic cooperation between our two countries, which is surprising given the 4 million Indian Americans, so many of whom work so closely with their counterparts in India on research and development, and really all Americans looking to do more business in India. So we need to do more on the economic front. So that second point, we can't just assume that this 20 years is going to continue upward. The third and final point I'd make is really to address your question, which is where do we go from here? You know, we like to talk about us being natural allies. And I think there is a way to be natural allies absent the alliance. So what does that actually mean? That means actually weaving together something that is potentially stronger than the mutual defense treaties of the 20th century. We can actually put something together that has flexibility to it, agility to it, respects both of our sovereign interests, respects our histories, but actually pulls us together in a strong way. So how do we do that? We do that with mechanisms like the Quad. We do that through full-scale cooperation. And look at the Quad working groups and look at the bilateral readout of the Modi-Biden visit. Health, climate, technology. Technology is going to be a driving kind of connector as we go forward. And if we continue to remember that we're connected by these democratic ideals, these shared values, plus these new elements of cooperation, I actually think that is the model. I think we're well on our way to securing that natural allies designation to make sure it's real. I would just say, you know, not as a political matter, I'm really excited about the team in Washington leading this effort. I was there in the Senate in the early 2000s, working as a staffer, feet from the Senate floor when we took up the U.S. India Civil Nuclear Cooperation Bill. And I saw then Chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Biden, actually taking a big lead in pushing for passage of the bill, which was a big departure from where the Democratic Party had been on proliferation issues. And it was a landmark moment. I was also there in 2006 when then Senator Biden said, my greatest hope is that in 2020, the U.S. and India would be the closest friends and partners. If so, the world will be a safer place. Now, that was a prediction 14 years ago or 15 years ago. We're now in 2021. I think we owe it to him, and I think we owe it to our populations to do that reset. Let's get another 20-year upward trajectory. I think we've got great leaders in place, both in India and the United States, to make that happen. And frankly, UCSD can be a big part of that because we need the thought leadership that goes with it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Verma. And what I thought, I thought it'll be good to quickly bring back Ambassador Sandhu to respond. And I think I really liked, what you ended with, which is to say the good news is we're in an upward trajectory, but we cannot take it for granted, right? So this takes constant effort, constant work. And I think one unifying theme that's come across all of the comments is that the depth of this partnership and relationship goes well beyond the governments. And it really is driven at the level of people, at the level of education, at the level of just exchanges. And so maybe, just quickly bringing back Ambassador Sandhu for a couple of minutes to respond to all of the panelists' comments. And then we are running out of time. And so maybe in this wrap up, maybe each of you, if you could just give one specific example of an area where you think things can be even better and what we could do to make the, exactly like Ambassador Verma said, the future is good, but we have to work to make it happen, right? So what are those areas where we can make concrete progress? And if you could each come in with one, that would be wonderful. And I'll take Ambassador Sandhu first, and then we'll go the same order.
Thank you, Karthik. All the three ambassadors here are people with long memories. So there's so much they bring on themselves. There's so much they have seen. As my good friend Rich said, I recall going back to '97, my days with him on Capitol. So, and look, he brought you out the statement by President Biden, and it was in 2006, and it said by 2020. So look, I mean, there's so much of potential that we all have to come together and achieve. Now, to answer you, I will again draw attention to the 5 baskets which I put out. I think that's where it's perhaps the way our relationship will go and the increasing depth. And I'm leaving out the strategic and defense because, a lot has been said, and I'm sure a lot will still be said. But on some of the other ones, for example, the digital IT, innovation, startups we have spoken about. And this time, Rich pointed out to some of the new domains and emerging technologies that have come in. Please take note of them. Space, health, security, semiconductors, AI, 5G, 6G, future generation telecom technology, blockchain, etc. Now, this is extremely important, and pandemic has shown us the importance of technology and how much on the digital side we are going. And here again, the private sector synergy is tremendous. So that's one area. Again, on the healthcare side, I have mentioned to you what is the kind of scope that is. I just want to give one more example here. Very recently, I was in Houston, and I was surprised, though certainly I would say expecting that one of the important, I mentioned to you some of the vaccine programs we have, and the Baylor College is doing something with eBio, and the doctor I'm referring to is well seen on CNN. I was surprised. He told me that the cost of their co-production is going to be $1.5. Look, President Biden has clearly said, and so has my Prime Minister, that no one is safe till everyone is safe. And these vaccines need to go to a lot of developing world. And that's where U.S. and India partnership in the healthcare, not only on affordable medicines and vaccines and healthcare on both our countries, but in global health. So that's another area. And if you also look into what is the energy basket, all the 3 ambassadors here know that just 5 years back, there was $0 of trade between us. Today, it stands to nearly 20 billion. And LNG, the gasification of India's economy, is very much part and parcel of our moving towards climate change. And you have seen that Prime Minister Modi has been front-footed. In Glasgow, he has taken the initiatives. You also know all the initiatives that are being taken in India. And we are going to be, India is going to reach a non-fossil energy capacity to 500 GW by 2030. 50% of our energy requirements from renewable will be there by 2030. We are total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons from now onwards till 2030. And then 2030, India will reduce the carbon intensity of its economy by less than 45%. And finally, by 2070, India will achieve the target of net zero. And remember, it's 1.3 billion people. They are developmental aspirations that in any democratic polity, the government has to be sensitive to. So, as I said, in the energy climate change sector, and finally, the one which I feel the strongest about is the education and knowledge partnership, in which university like yours have an important role to play. not only just getting Indian students, I mentioned to you 200,000 students, 2/3 of them are in STEM areas, but also under the new education policy, we can have campus to campus relations, intertwining of degrees. And I'm happy to say that, in fact, tomorrow itself, we are having a roundtable in which your president will be participating with our education minister. So such initiatives are very important. So I'm hopeful for the future. Thank you, Karthik.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ambassador Sandhu. And, I guess we are almost at time, but let me just bring everybody back in for a minute or 1.5 minutes, and then we'll wrap this up. So Ambassador Roemer, please.
Yes, first of all, I just say that the United States does have a grand strategy. There are the grids that Ambassador Rao talked about, the U.S. India partnership, the bilateral relationships that we've structured with other countries in Asia, the Quad, the Five Eyes, the AUKUS, all this coming together as a grand strategy for the United States to promote democracy, human rights, peace, and prosperity, and not try to contain China, but try to fiercely compete with China and make sure that China does not aggressively push other countries away from those aspirations. So there is a grand strategy in place. I think President Biden and his team, including people like Jake Sullivan, are doing a very good job in trying to implement that and execute on results. What are an area or two for the future for us? I was in China right before COVID hit, and in a province where the Communist Party leader said, "Please help us, Ambassador Roemer. Our skies are on fire. We are burning up in China." Climate change is an area not just for the United States and India to work on the technologies of the future, but the United States and India and China and many, many other countries to share technology, to preserve the earth, and to create jobs for future employment. And I don't think it's limited to climate change. I think healthcare is a growing area with demographics exploding to later life, to vaccines and future pandemics. And finally, the Indo-Pacific. This is an area where most of the trade in the world is going through, and the United States and India and other partners need to make sure that we peacefully secure the Indian Ocean, the Malacca Straits, and the Indo-Pacific, so that peaceful trade and economic trade can go further in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Ambassador Rao, please.
Yeah, thank you, Karthik. I won't go into the areas that the other ambassadors have spoken of. I'll just, I'll recite it as a mantra: technology, technology, technology. And given India's strengths in software development and the vast pool of computer engineers and programmers with the knowledge of English, an advantage that China lacks, there is much that we can achieve through a much closer partnership between India and the United States, and also with other members of the Quad, because India's talent pool in technology is really unparalleled. And today, because much of the hardware is being made in China, a large part of embedded software is also being developed there. And once you decide to diversify from Chinese hardware, then embedded software development is not a requirement. It can be done in countries like India, and there's a huge inventory and capacity of digital talent in the country. Cities like Bangalore, where I'm located, Chennai, Hyderabad, and Pune can be leads for the region. And even in the military sphere, let me emphasize, India's IT capabilities, inventory of engineers, cloud capability, they're all massive allies for technology-driven warfare. So today, I think with the pandemic, we've seen an acceleration of services that can be delivered on wire. And lobbies, in the United States who speak of visas being to be denied to foreign IT professionals, I feel may be fighting yesterday's war, because that binding constraint for the Indian IT industry being the H-1B visa, I think that constraint is no longer so binding. Work from home means work from anywhere. And I think it's important in our relationship, the U.S. India relationship, to really put the worship of talent, literally, on a pedestal. And that's what made America great. And that is what will make it continue to be great in the future. Remember, the Chinese Communist Party said in 2016, the essence of being innovation-driven is being talent-driven. So we need that dose of innovation, we need that dose of talent, and we need that little pixie dust of inspiration. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Ambassador Verma, please.
I think I can do this in 30 seconds. I would say if we could focus on three things. First, some sort of trade agreement between the U.S. and India. We can start with a bilateral investment treaty, work our way up to a free trade agreement. We need some sort of confidence building measures in the trade category first. Secondly, I'd love to see more U.S. students in India. We have 200,000 Indian students coming here. We have a small fraction of American students going to India. We should change that and do whatever we can. And third and finally, Ambassador Roemer mentioned AUKUS a few times. I'd love to see an AUKUS involving India and more ambitious, so basically more ambitious defense kind of plans and programs involving India with all the advanced technologies that are out there and possible. It'll require strategic choices, I think, on both sides, both in India and in the United States, but I think that's something we should aspire to.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to just close with one of the most, inspiring quotes I've read like in the past year. And there's just this wonderful essay in the Washington Post by former U.S. Secretary of State and Treasury George Shultz, reflecting on 100 years, of his life. And his most important insight was the most important thing he had learned in his career was the centrality of trust in any collective situation. As he said, trust is the coin of the realm. When trust was in the room, whatever that room was, the family room, the school room, the locker room, the government room, the military room, good things happened. When trust was not in the room, good things did not happen. Everything else is details. And I think, I want to end with that because I see that as just almost the way to end with what we're trying to do with this center, with this forum, is to create more and more opportunities for these deep building of trust. And once you have that trust, all the good things will then happen downstream. So thank you once again to our very, very distinguished panel. And let me hand over back to Dean Freune.
Thank you, Kartik, and what a beautiful ending. Thank you again to Ambassadors Sandhu, Roemer, Verma, and Rao, and to Professor Muralidharan for an excellent discussion. We hope that you'll join us for future events as we work toward launching the 21st Century Center on U.S.-India Relations. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all very much.